The old boxing gym in General Santos City stood like a relic from another time, its walls stained with decades of sweat and dreams. Isagani Reyes sat on a weathered wooden stool, watching the afternoon light filter through cracked windows onto the empty ring. At 72, his hands bore the calluses of a lifetime spent wrapping bandages and holding mitts, but now they trembled slightly as he swept the same floor he had cleaned for 40 years. The gym that once echoed with the sounds of young fighters pursuing impossible dreams had grown quiet, visited only by neighborhood children who occasionally peered through the fence. Isagani's routine had become a meditation of solitude, arriving each morning at sunrise to unlock the rusty gates and departing at sunset with the weight of memories heavy on his shoulders. The faded photographs on the walls told stories of local champions who had trained under his guidance, but one frame remained turned face down on his desk, a picture too painful to display, yet too precious to discard. His wife Elena had passed 3 years ago, taking with her the gentle voice that used to remind him of all the lives he had touched and all the fighters who had grown strong under his watchful eye. The younger trainers in the city whispered that old Isagani lived in the past, unable to accept that modern boxing had moved beyond his traditional methods. They spoke of scientific training programs and nutritional supplements, dismissing the wisdom he had gathered through decades of watching young men transform their pain into power. But Isagani knew something they didn't understand, that the most important battles were fought not in rings but in the hearts of fighters who learned to believe in themselves. He had seen it happen countless times, the moment when a young person's eyes changed from hopeful to determined. Each evening, as he locked the gym and walked the dusty streets toward his small house, Isagani wondered if his life's work had meant anything at all. The neighborhood had changed around him, new buildings replacing the humble structures where he had first learned to train fighters from his own mentor, the legendary Teodoro Santos. The old community of boxers and their families had scattered, some to bigger cities, others to different dreams entirely. He often paused at the corner store owned by Bayani Cruz, exchanging pleasantries about the weather, while both men carefully avoided mentioning the emptiness that had settled over their once vibrant neighborhood. The weight of being forgotten pressed down on Isagani's shoulders like a heavy training bag he could no longer lift. He had given his entire life to developing young fighters, pouring his knowledge and passion into anyone willing to learn, regardless of their ability to pay for training. His methods were simple but profound, teaching discipline through repetition, building character through hardship, and nurturing the spark of greatness he could recognize in certain fighters from their very first day in the gym. But now, in the silence of his twilight years, he wondered if any of those young people remembered the old trainer who had believed in them when no one else would. The photograph in his desk drawer remained a source of both pride and sorrow, capturing a moment when everything seemed possible and the future stretched before them like an open road. In quiet moments, when the gym fell completely silent and the shadows grew long, Isagani would sometimes reach for that picture, then pull his hand back, unable to face the reminder of dreams that had grown far beyond his small corner of the boxing world. He had made peace with obscurity, telling himself that a teacher's greatest reward was not recognition, but the knowledge that his students had succeeded, even if they had forgotten who first taught them to throw a proper punch. The memory always began the same way. A scrawny 12-year-old boy standing at the gym's entrance, with dirt under his fingernails and determination burning in his dark eyes. Manny Pacquiao had arrived on Isagani's doorstep, like countless other children from the poorest neighborhoods. But something about his posture suggested he was different from the others who came seeking escape from their circumstances. The boy's clothes were too small and his shoes had holes, but he stood straight and looked directly into Isagani's eyes when he asked if he could learn to box. There was no desperation in his voice, only a quiet confidence that made the old trainer take notice. Isagani remembered how the other boys in the gym had laughed when Manny first wrapped his hands, his small fists disappearing inside the oversized gloves they had scrounged together from donated equipment. The kid from Kibawe had never seen a proper boxing ring before, but he watched everything with the intensity of someone studying for the most important test of his life. When Isagani demonstrated basic footwork, Manny would practice the movements until his legs shook with exhaustion, then continue practicing while the other boys rested. The trainer recognized something rare in this young fighter, the willingness to work harder than natural talent required. The early training sessions were brutal in their simplicity, Hours of conditioning work that separated the committed from the curious. Manny would arrive at dawn, often before Isagani had unlocked the gym, waiting patiently by the gates until the trainer appeared with his ring of keys. While other boys complained about running laps around the neighborhood, Manny would complete his assigned distance and then run additional circuits on his own. Isagani began to understand that this child wasn't just learning to box, he was transforming himself through discipline and repetition into something entirely new. The breakthrough came during Manny's 4th month of training, when Isagani noticed that the boy's punches had developed a different quality. The speed was still developing and the technique needed refinement, but there was a snap to his combinations that couldn't be taught, only discovered. More importantly, Manny had learned to think several moves ahead, setting up combinations with feints and angles that showed real boxing intelligence. Isagani began to spend extra time with the young fighter after regular training hours, sharing the subtle techniques that separated good boxers from great ones. What impressed the trainer most was Manny's character outside the ring, the way he helped younger children with their technique and never boasted about his growing skills. The boy understood that strength was a responsibility, not a privilege, and he carried himself with the humble confidence of someone who knew his worth without needing to prove it to others. Isagani watched as Manny's presence began to elevate the entire gym, inspiring other young fighters to train harder and conduct themselves with greater dignity. The old trainer realized he wasn't just developing a boxer, he was witnessing the formation of a leader. During those precious early months, Isagani and Manny developed a relationship that transcended the typical bond between trainer and student. The boy would arrive early to help prepare the gym for the day, organizing equipment and sweeping floors without being asked. In the evenings, after other fighters had gone home, they would work on technique while discussing life, dreams, and the importance of never forgetting where you came from. Isagani shared stories about the great fighters he had known, while Manny spoke about his family and his determination to lift them out of poverty through boxing. Those conversations, conducted in the gathering darkness of the old gym, would remain among the most meaningful moments of the trainer's life. The day Manny told him about the opportunity in Manila felt like watching a beloved son prepare to leave home for the first time. A talent scout had been impressed by the young fighter's performance in a local tournament and wanted to bring him to the capital for better training facilities and more competitive opponents. Isagani knew this moment would come. He had seen Manny's potential from the beginning, but knowledge didn't make the reality any easier to accept. The trainer spent the night walking through the empty gym, touching the heavy bags and speed bags where Manny had spent countless hours developing his skills. The conversation took place in the corner of the gym where they had shared so many training sessions, with late afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows and casting long shadows across the floor. Manny's voice carried both excitement and uncertainty as he explained the opportunity, his respect for Isagani evident in every word. The trainer listened carefully, understanding that this was exactly what they had been working toward, even as his heart began to accept the inevitable separation. This was the moment when a teacher's success became measured by his willingness to let his student grow beyond his reach. Isagani spent their final weeks together, sharing every piece of knowledge he could think of, techniques and strategies he had been saving for when Manny was ready to understand them. They worked on advanced combinations and defensive movements, but more importantly, the trainer emphasized the mental aspects of boxing that would serve the young fighter well in higher levels of competition. He spoke about maintaining humility regardless of success, the importance of remembering your roots, and the responsibility that comes with being blessed with exceptional ability. The farewell took place on a Tuesday morning, with Manny's few possessions packed into a worn duffel bag and a bus ticket to Manila tucked safely in his pocket. Isagani had given him a small notebook filled with training routines and tactical advice, along with the phone number of a contact in the capital who might help him find his way. They embraced briefly at the bus station, both men understanding that this was more than a goodbye. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The trainer watched until the bus disappeared around a corner, then walked slowly back to his gym to face the silence that would define the years to come. The letters came regularly at first, Manny writing to share news about his training and early professional fights. Isagani treasured each update, reading them multiple times and sharing the highlights with anyone who would listen. The young fighter was making progress in Manila, learning from experienced trainers and facing increasingly skilled opponents. His writing reflected growth and maturity, but also a growing distance from the small gym in General Santos City where his journey had begun. The trainer wrote back occasionally, offering encouragement and reminding Manny to stay true to the principles they had developed together. As months turned to years, the correspondence gradually diminished until it stopped altogether. Isagani understood that Manny was building a new life and couldn't be expected to maintain connections with every person who had helped along the way. The trainer continued to follow his former student's career through newspapers and radio broadcasts, feeling a complex mixture of pride and melancholy, as Manny's fame grew beyond anything they had imagined during those early training sessions. Success had taken his student far from the world they had shared, and Isagani learned to find satisfaction in knowing he had played a small but important role in launching an extraordinary career. The photograph on his desk captured their last training session together, both of them grinning after a particularly good workout, unaware that it would be their final time sharing the ring. Isagani kept it displayed for several years, pointing it out to visitors and telling stories about training the future champion. But eventually, the pride began to mix with loneliness, and he turned the frame face down, unable to bear the daily reminder of a connection that had become a cherished memory rather than a living relationship. He told himself that forgetting was natural, that successful people couldn't maintain ties with everyone from their past, but the rationalization didn't ease the quiet ache in his heart. 23 years had passed since Manny boarded that bus to Manila, and Isagani's world had shrunk to the familiar boundaries of his neighborhood and the increasingly empty gym. The boxing landscape in General Santos City had changed dramatically, with newer facilities offering modern equipment and young trainers who had studied the latest techniques. His old gym survived on the loyalty of a few long-time members and the occasional teenager who wandered in looking for something they couldn't quite name. The trainer had watched his former students rise to global stardom from a distance, following each triumph through television broadcasts and newspaper headlines. The loneliness hit hardest during Manny's biggest fights, when the entire Philippines seemed to stop and watch their hero compete on the world's largest stages. Isagani would sit alone in his living room, studying every movement and recognizing techniques they had practiced together decades earlier. He could see remnants of their training sessions in Manny's footwork and defensive positioning, subtle elements that had evolved but retained their fundamental structure. These moments brought both joy and sorrow, pride in his contribution, mixed with the melancholy recognition that he was now just another anonymous viewer watching from thousands of miles away. Elena had been his anchor during those years, gently reminding him that a teacher's greatest reward was seeing his students succeed, regardless of whether they remembered their early lessons. She would find him staring at the television after Manny's victories, lost in memories of the determined 12-year-old who had transformed their quiet gym into a place of dreams and possibilities. Her presence had made the silence bearable, her love providing comfort when the weight of being forgotten threatened to overwhelm him. But since her death, the emptiness had expanded to fill every corner of his life. The neighborhood children who occasionally visited the gym knew Isagani had once trained a famous boxer, but the story had taken on mythical qualities that bore little resemblance to reality. Some claimed he had discovered Manny's talent through a mystical vision. Others insisted the champion still sent money to support the old gym. The trainer never corrected these embellishments, understanding that people needed their stories to carry magic and meaning. He had learned to live with being a character in other people's fantasies, rather than a real person with genuine memories and continuing needs. Health problems had begun to accumulate like shadows gathering at dusk, small ailments that reminded Isagani of his mortality without threatening it directly. His hands ached in the mornings, making it difficult to demonstrate techniques to the few students who still sought his guidance. His eyesight had dimmed enough that reading became a challenge, forcing him to rely more heavily on the radio for news about the boxing world. These physical limitations served as daily reminders that his active contribution to the sport was ending, that he was transitioning from participant to observer in the final chapter of his life. Dr. Renato Villanueva had been encouraging him to consider selling the gym and moving to a retirement community where he could receive better care and have more social interaction. The suggestion was practical and well-intentioned, but Isagani couldn't imagine abandoning the place where he had spent his most meaningful years. The gym represented more than a building. It was a repository of memories, dreams, and the countless small moments that had given his life purpose. Even in its current state of gentle decline, it remained the physical manifestation of everything he had tried to accomplish as a trainer and mentor. The thought of Manny sometimes brought tears that Isagani quickly wiped away, embarrassed by the depth of his emotional investment in a relationship that had ended decades earlier. He told himself that he was proud of his former student's accomplishments and harbored no resentment about being forgotten. But in his most honest moments, usually in the deep quiet of early morning, he admitted to himself that he had hoped for something different, perhaps a visit, a phone call, or even a message acknowledging the role he had played in launching one of boxing's greatest careers. The silence had become its own form of training, teaching him to find peace with expectations that would never be fulfilled. The morning started like any other, with Isagani unlocking the gym at sunrise and beginning his familiar routine of checking equipment and preparing for the few students who might appear later in the day. His movements had become slower and more deliberate with age, but he maintained the same methodical approach to caring for his space that had defined his 40 years of training fighters. The radio played softly in the background, mixing local news with music that helped fill the silence. He was organizing hand wraps in the storage room when he heard the sound that would change everything. A firm, respectful knock on the front door of the gym. Visitors were rare enough that any interruption to his routine felt significant. But something about the quality of this knock suggested purpose rather than casual curiosity. Isagani made his way to the entrance, his steps echoing in the empty space, wondering who might be seeking him out so early in the morning. Through the frosted glass window, he could see the silhouette of a man standing patiently outside, waiting with the kind of stillness that indicated respect for the space and its occupant. The trainer's hand hesitated on the door handle for a moment, an inexplicable sense of anticipation building in his chest. When he opened the door, time seemed to collapse into itself. The man standing before him was older, broader, and carried himself with the confident bearing of someone who had faced the world's greatest challenges, but his eyes were unmistakably the same ones that had burned with determination in a 12-year-old boy decades earlier. Manny Pacquiao stood on the threshold of the gym where his boxing journey had begun, wearing a simple white shirt and jeans, his expression a mixture of nervousness and hope. For several long seconds, neither man spoke, both overwhelmed by the weight of years and memories, suddenly colliding in a single moment. The champion's first words were simple and heartfelt, an acknowledgement of the time that had passed and an expression of gratitude that had been 23 years in the making. He had come alone, without bodyguards or entourage, carrying only a small bag and the accumulated wisdom of a career that had taken him to heights neither of them could have imagined during those early training sessions. Manny's voice carried the same respect and humility that had characterized his youth, but now tempered with the authority of someone who had proven himself on the world's biggest stages. He asked if he could come inside, if they could talk about the old days and the lessons that had stayed with him throughout his career. Isagani's legs felt unsteady as he led Manny into the gym, his mind struggling to process the reality of his former student's presence. The champion moved through the space with obvious familiarity, touching equipment and examining corners where they had spent countless hours together. His eyes lingered on the ring where he had learned basic combinations, the heavy bags where he had developed his power, and the small office where Isagani had shared stories about the great fighters of previous generations. The trainer watched in amazement as Manny seemed to absorb the atmosphere, his expression suggesting that every detail held significance and meaning. The conversation began tentatively, with both men aware that they were navigating territory that had been shaped by decades of distance and different experiences. Manny spoke about his career with characteristic humility, emphasizing the role that his early training had played in establishing the foundation for everything that followed. He mentioned specific techniques and lessons that Isagani had taught him, details so precise that the trainer realized his student had retained far more from their time together than he had ever imagined. The champion's memory of their shared experiences was remarkably vivid, including moments that Isagani himself had nearly forgotten, but which had apparently made lasting impressions on his young mind. As the conversation deepened, Isagani felt the walls he had built around his heart beginning to dissolve. The pain of being forgotten was replaced by the overwhelming realization that he had never been forgotten at all, that his influence had been carried forward in ways both visible and invisible throughout Manny's extraordinary career. The champion spoke about difficult moments in his life when he had drawn strength from lessons learned in this very gym, principles about perseverance and character that had been more valuable than any technical skill. For the first time in years, Isagani felt the deep satisfaction of a teacher whose work had truly mattered, whose impact had extended far beyond anything he had dared to hope. Manny's eyes moved around the gym with the careful attention of someone revisiting a sacred space, taking in details that had remained unchanged despite the passage of decades. He walked to the corner where Isagani had kept the old heavy bag, running his hands along the worn leather and describing how the uneven texture had taught him to adapt his punches to different surfaces and angles. The champion's recollections were so specific that the trainer found himself remembering training sessions he thought had been lost to time, moments when a young fighter's determination had burned so brightly it seemed to illuminate the entire gym. Each shared memory felt like a gift, returning pieces of his life that Isagani had thought were gone forever. The conversation turned to the early sparring sessions, when Manny had been matched against older, more experienced fighters who were supposed to teach him humility and patience. Isagani remembered how the boy had approached each challenge with fearless intelligence, studying his opponents and finding ways to neutralize their advantages through speed and unconventional angles. Manny laughed as he recalled getting knocked down repeatedly in those early sessions, but emphasized how each defeat had taught him something valuable about distance, timing, and the importance of protecting himself while creating opportunities to counterattack. They moved to the ring itself, where Manny asked if he could step through the ropes one more time. The champion climbed onto the canvas with obvious reverence, his movements careful and respectful as he positioned himself in the center of the space where his dreams had first taken shape. Isagani watched from ringside as Manny went through some of the basic combinations they had practiced together, his form still recognizable despite years of refinement under world-class trainers. The techniques had evolved and become more sophisticated, but their fundamental structure remained rooted in the lessons learned in this modest gym in General Santos City. The trainer was surprised by how much Manny remembered about the philosophical aspects of their training, the conversations about character and responsibility that had taken place during rest periods between rounds. The champion spoke about how those discussions had shaped his understanding of what it meant to be a fighter, not just in terms of physical competition, but as a representative of his community and country. He credited Isagani with teaching him that true strength came from lifting others up rather than knocking them down, a principle that had guided his charitable work and public behavior throughout his career. Manny shared stories about moments during his biggest fights when he had drawn upon mental techniques that Isagani had taught him, methods for staying calm under pressure and maintaining focus when everything seemed to be falling apart. The trainer listened in amazement as his former student described using breathing exercises and visualization methods they had practiced in the quiet corners of this gym, simple tools that had proven invaluable on the world's biggest stages. These revelations made Isagani understand that his influence had been present in every major victory, every championship moment, even when he wasn't physically there to witness them. The afternoon light streaming through the gym windows created the same patterns that had defined their original training sessions, and both men seemed to recognize the symbolic significance of being reunited in this setting. Manny spoke about how he had often thought about returning to visit, but had been afraid that too much time had passed, that the connection they had shared might have been weakened by distance and different experiences. The trainer assured him that some bonds transcend time and circumstance, that the respect and affection he felt for his former student had only deepened with the years. They stood together in the ring where it all began, two men separated by fame and fortune, but united by memories that had shaped both of their lives in profound and lasting ways. As their conversation continued into the afternoon, Manny reached into the small bag he had brought with him and withdrew an envelope that bore obvious signs of careful handling. His expression grew serious as he explained that he had been carrying this with him for months, waiting for the right moment to make this visit and present what was inside. The champion's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope, revealing documents that would take several moments for Isagani to fully understand. The trainer's reading glasses were retrieved from his desk, and as the meaning of the papers became clear, his eyes filled with tears that he made no attempt to hide. The documents detailed the establishment of a foundation dedicated to supporting amateur boxing programs throughout the Philippines, with special emphasis on providing equipment, training, and scholarships to disadvantaged youth who showed promise in the sport. But the most remarkable aspect of the foundation was its name, the Isagani Reyes Boxing Foundation, and the designation of the trainer as its honorary president and primary advisor. Manny explained that he had been planning this for years, wanting to create a lasting tribute to the man who had given him his start and taught him that boxing was about more than winning fights. The financial commitment was substantial enough to support dozens of training facilities and hundreds of young fighters. But Manny was careful to explain that the foundation was about more than money. He wanted to institutionalize the training philosophy and character development methods that Isagani had pioneered, ensuring that future generations of fighters would benefit from the same principled approach that had shaped his own career. The champion spoke passionately about his vision for programs that would emphasize education alongside athletic development, creating pathways for young people to improve their lives, whether or not they achieved professional success in boxing. Isagani's initial response was overwhelmed silence, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what his former student was proposing. The trainer had spent decades working with minimal resources, scraping together equipment and creating opportunities for young fighters through determination and creativity rather than financial support. The idea that his name would be associated with a properly funded program capable of reaching fighters throughout the country seemed almost impossible to believe. He looked around his modest gym, trying to imagine how his small contribution to Manny's early development could justify such an extraordinary honor. The champion anticipated his trainer's hesitation and spent considerable time explaining how the foundation would work practically, with Isagani's role designed to utilize his knowledge and experience without overwhelming him physically. Regional coordinators would handle day-to-day operations, but major decisions about training methods, scholarship recipients, and program development would require the trainer's input and approval. Manny emphasized that this wasn't charity or an obligation. It was a recognition of value and an opportunity to multiply the positive impact that Isagani had been making one fighter at a time for 40 years. The emotional weight of the moment was almost unbearable for both men, as years of separation and uncertainty were replaced by a connection that felt stronger than ever. Isagani finally found his voice and expressed his gratitude, but also his amazement that someone of Manny's stature would choose to honor a simple trainer who had merely done his job with love and dedication. The champion's response was immediate and heartfelt. He explained that simple trainers who did their jobs with love and dedication were the rarest and most valuable people in the world of boxing, and that recognizing their contributions was not just appropriate but essential for the sport's future. As the sun began to set through the gym windows, casting familiar shadows across the floor, where they had shared so many training sessions, both men understood that this moment represented more than a reunion or even a generous gift. It was a completion of a circle that had begun with a 12-year-old boy's dream and had grown into something larger than either of them could have imagined. The foundation would ensure that Isagani's influence would extend far beyond his own lifetime, touching the lives of countless young fighters who would benefit from the principles and methods he had developed through decades of patient, dedicated work. The weeks following Manny's visit transformed Isagani's world in ways that went far beyond the practical implications of the foundation. The trainer found himself waking each morning with a sense of purpose that had been missing for years, his mind active with plans for how the new programs could be structured and implemented. The empty gym that had felt like a monument to faded glory was suddenly alive with possibilities, as local officials and boxing enthusiasts began reaching out to discuss how General Santos City might serve as the foundation's flagship location. The silence that had defined his recent years was replaced by a productive buzz of activity and planning. The foundation's first initiative was the renovation of Isagani's gym, transforming it into a model training facility while preserving the character and atmosphere that had made it special. Manny insisted that the original ring be maintained exactly as it was, serving as both a functional training space and a reminder of where everything had begun. New equipment was installed alongside the old A, creating a bridge between traditional training methods and modern techniques. The trainer watched in amazement as his modest gym evolved into something that could serve as an inspiration for similar facilities throughout the country. Young fighters began arriving from across the region, drawn by the opportunity to train under Isagani's guidance and learn the methods that had helped shape a world champion. The trainer discovered that his age and experience, which he had seen as limitations, were actually valuable assets that gave him credibility and authority with ambitious young athletes. His teaching methods had been refined by decades of practice, and his understanding of character development had deepened through years of observation and reflection. The foundation provided him with the resources to implement his vision on a scale he had never imagined possible. The media attention surrounding the foundation's launch brought recognition that Isagani had never sought but found deeply satisfying. Reporters came to interview him about his training philosophy and his early relationship with Manny, finally giving him the opportunity to share insights that had been developed through a lifetime of working with fighters. He spoke about the importance of building character alongside physical skills, the value of traditional techniques that emphasized fundamentals over flashy movements, and the responsibility that came with developing young people's potential both inside and outside the ring. Manny's visits became regular occurrences, with the champion stopping by whenever his schedule permitted to check on the foundation's progress and spend time with his old trainer. These meetings were treasured by both men, opportunities to discuss not just boxing but life, family, and the responsibility that came with success. The trainer was amazed by how much Manny valued his opinions and sought his guidance on matters ranging from training techniques to charitable initiatives. Their relationship had evolved from teacher and student to something more complex and mutual, with each man contributing wisdom gained through different but complementary experiences. The impact of the foundation extended far beyond boxing, creating economic opportunities in the community and inspiring other successful individuals to invest in similar programs. Local businesses began supporting the training facilities, understanding that the presence of the foundation brought positive attention and resources to the entire region. Young people who might otherwise have had limited options found themselves with access to quality training, educational support, and mentorship programs that could change the trajectory of their lives. The ripple effects of Manny's gesture continued to expand, touching families and communities in ways that neither man had anticipated. As Isagani reflected on the extraordinary turn his life had taken, he understood that his story was really about the power of influence and the importance of investing in others without expecting recognition or reward. The foundation ensured that his methods and philosophy would be preserved and transmitted to future generations. But more importantly, it demonstrated that small acts of dedication and care could have consequences far beyond what anyone might imagine. The forgotten trainer had discovered that he had never been forgotten at all, that his influence had been quietly growing and spreading through the career of a student who had never stopped being grateful for the lessons learned in a modest gym in General Santos City. The evening conversations with Manny often returned to the early days of their training together, but now those memories carried different meanings. What had once seemed like simple preparation for local competitions was revealed as the foundation for a career that had brought honor to an entire nation. The techniques they had practiced with worn equipment in an aging gym had been refined and perfected on the world's biggest stages. Most importantly, the character lessons that had seemed like natural extensions of boxing training had proven to be the most valuable legacy of all, shaping not just a champion but a leader who understood the importance of giving back and lifting others up. The Isagani Reyes Boxing Foundation became more than a tribute to a forgotten trainer. It evolved into a living example of how success could be used to create opportunities for others and how gratitude could be transformed into meaningful action that benefited entire communities. The trainer who had once worried about being forgotten had instead become the inspiration for a program that would touch thousands of lives and ensure that his influence would continue long after his physical presence was gone. In the quiet moments before sleep, Isagani would often smile as he contemplated the boy who had walked into his gym with nothing but determination and had returned as a man capable of changing the world, one young fighter at a time. This story celebrates the profound impact that dedicated teachers and mentors have on their students' lives, even when that influence goes unrecognized for years. It reminds us that true success is measured not just by personal achievement, but by our willingness to honor those who helped us along the way and to create opportunities for others to follow similar paths. The bond between teacher and student, when built on mutual respect and genuine care, can transcend time and circumstance to create legacies that benefit entire communities. If you like this story, leave a like and subscribe to our channel.